MMORPGs are games that constantly evolve and change. What is normal one expansion may be gone the next, and sometimes new systems prove so successful or end up being so ingrained within the fabric of the game that they fundamentally change it forever. Today I want to talk about the updates to World of Warcraft that have been the most game-changing in its 20+ year duration. I also want to focus on those gameplay-changing updates that have stuck as well, and ones which are still part of the game today, rather than including ones which were, whilst impactful at the time, didn't last more than a few expansions at most. So with that said, let's start and check out what I think are the 10 most impactful gameplay updates World of Warcraft has ever seen. Starting off at 10, I want to talk about what I call the Timeless Isle format of content. This was the earliest example of a zone that Blizzard created towards the end of an expansion that was purely designed to have content there that will last 4 months. The name Timeless was truly fitting, as completing the meta achievement there would take a crazy amount of time. There were the timeless coins to grind for various rewards, the reputation with Emperor Xiaohao, battle pets, 2 sets of world bosses in the August Celestials and Ordos, collectible toys, hidden areas of the zone that were difficult to get to, and loads of random items like that meteor that launch you across the map. There were also random events happening constantly, such as the ghost ship, Huolom, rare spawns and more. Simply put, the Timeless Isle was the most repeatable content Blizzard had ever fit into such a small zone, and in the future they very much repeated this format when it came to endgame zones. Warlords of Draenor had Tanaan Jungle, Legion had Suramar and later Argus, BFA had Mechagon and Nazjatar, and so on. In expansions past this, Blizzard have started spreading out collection and completion content much more, instead of just focusing it into endgame zones, even though new content is still always pretty feature dense in this game. Either way, for me, the Timeless Isle was the trendsetter and the first of its kind, and though Blizzard do things a bit differently nowadays, when it comes to collection and completion based content, I still think it is worth talking about. Before we go on, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev aims to give you the tools to get fully on board with the Python, Go and SQL programming languages in order to forge a career in back-end web development. It keeps things more interactive than regular online courses by treating this process as though it is a proper RPG with experience, leaderboards, achievements and more. It's just that bit extra to keep you interested and motivated to progress. Speaking of progress, Boot.dev believe in hands-on learning, and one of the key things they want to get you doing is writing tons of your own code so that you can really get an understanding of each point before moving on. And if you do get stuck, there's always plenty of help too, such as Boots the AI Bear, who will help via asking you questions to help you understand, rather than just instantly handing you the answers. Personally, as someone who spent hours googling stuff to try and learn things for editing or making videos, having this kind of resource to hand would have been so useful. And even if you want to just check out Boot.dev before committing fully, it really is risk-free, because all the content is free to read and watch in guest mode, and there is a 30 days no questions asked refund policy, as well as a free demo of every course and its interactive features. So why not check them out? You can go to Boot.dev and try their courses for free, and then use my code WILLE to get 25% off your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Many thanks to Boot.dev for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. Next is a gameplay update that was technically made in Warlords of Draenor, and that's a change to raiding that stuck to this day: the brand new Mythic mode. And yes, Siege of Orgrimmar was technically the first raid to be given a Mythic difficulty, however this happened in the Warlords of Draenor pre-patch, so it is an update from WoD. Blizzard had really been trying to figure out raiding over World of Warcraft's first several expansions, and they changed it all the time. At the largest raid size, we went from 40 players in vanilla to 25 in TBC, and then in Wrath, something changed about raiding with every single brand new tier. It started with 10 or 25, then we had hard mode in Ulduar, then heroic in Trial of the Grand Crusader, and then heroic and attempts in ICC. Kata changed this to just 10 or 25 heroic and increased the difficulty, and Mr. Pandaria followed with that format. But Blizzard saw 10 and 25 heroic both being offered as problematic. Sometimes there were fights that were easier on 10 player because you have mechanics where you needed to spread out, and when you have less players you have more room to work with. Alternatively, negatively on 25-player fights that needed a lot of raid-wide cooldowns or tons of healing, they were often easier on that difficulty because when you have more players, you just have more cooldowns to use. Also, people endlessly argued over which mode was in fact harder and the volume of loot that dropped between each difficulty. This probably stems from Wrath of the Lich King, when 10 mode was literally designed to be easier than 25, but Blizzard liked to change that in Kata so that they were both on equal footing. So in Warlords of Draenor they came up with the answer, the brand new Mythic mode. This was 20 player only and essentially replaced Heroic as the new hardest raid difficulty. This would allow Blizzard to tune the fights perfectly for 20 players and to know how much loot should be given, which you have to imagine made their job as designers much easier and allowed players to pick which type of raiding they wanted to do, from the super easy LFR all the way to Mythic. Mythic is still the format that's used all these years later too, and things have only gotten more and more difficult at the top end. At the start of BFA, the Race to World First Guild method infamously streamed their Mythic progression for the first time ever, allowing viewers to follow along and see what it takes to be in one of the best guilds in the world in real time, and this event was hugely successful, leading to the Race to World First still being a highly anticipated event with each new raid tier, all thanks to Mythic mode. And whilst I think Mythic launches in a state where it's honestly way too difficult for even Mythic raiders and Blizzard just want a good Race to World First, it's still bringing more new eyes to the game by doing this, so overall Mythic mode has been an important addition to the game. At number 8 is a more recent update made to World of Warcraft, and it's one that came in Dragonflight, and that's dragon riding. Mounts have always just been a huge part of World of Warcraft, and everyone has their favourites, but up until Dragonflight, flying mounts just felt kind of, well, not very exciting to use. Well, they do now anyway after you've tried dragon riding in comparison. Whereas your flying mount used to be point it in the right direction and wait for it to reach its location, dragon riding completely changed the whole format. On top of that, Blizzard went and updated practically every mount to have new animations that are unique to dragon riding that fit in with their models thematically. And dragon riding turned flying into something that was just kind of okay and convenient into something totally different. Now there was weight to flight, you gain velocity whilst moving downwards, and have abilities to manage your flight too. Dragon riding has also been introduced as a mechanic on boss fights such as Tindral in Amir Drasil, or Dimensius more recently in Manaforge Omega. There are dragon riding races out in the open world to complete too for the challenge, as well as various achievements. And when you go back to the classic versions of the game with flying after having played modern WoW, honestly it doesn't feel great. You mount up, you press your ascent button, nothing happens, and you go, oh yeah, we don't do that here, guess I'll just point myself in the right direction and wait. Saying this, there is something about dragon riding which just fits better into the modern game with their zone size and pacing of the gameplay in general and graphics. It's weird because I think the old flying system is definitely worse, but it does work better in the expansions where it already exists, if that makes sense. Either way, dragon riding was a complete overhaul to flying and definitely deserves a place on this list. At number 7, we're heading back to Wrath of the Lich King for an update that took place towards the end of the expansion, the introduction of the Looking for Dungeon tool. The LFD tool was a big turning point in World of Warcraft history and made it easier than ever to find a group and join into a dungeon, and the LFD has been one of the most criticized updates Blizzard has ever done. In the lead up to Classic WoW releasing pre-2019, you'd have believed that the LFD was an update which totally ruined the game, destroyed community, and drove a wedge between player interaction. Then many years later, when Wrath Classic was dropping, Blizzard announced that the LFD would not be returning for the expansion, and the community response was immediately divided. As it turns out, a rather large number of players did in fact not want to stand in Dalaran spamming looking for a tank for 20 minutes, and would have just rather pushed a button and been teleported to a dungeon, and Blizzard ended up re-adding the LFD right towards the end of Wrath Classic, about in line with the patch of when it would have been originally released actually. And there are even versions of vanilla now which have adopted the retail LFM tool when it comes to finding groups. Anyways, when the LFD first released in Wrath, it was even controversial then. For the first time ever, you had large groups of players queuing up into heroic dungeons who hadn't really done that much group content otherwise. And yes, infamously, the majority of the heroics were completely face roll in Wrath, but the LFD was released alongside the new ICC dungeon locations, and those dungeons on Heroic could be a bit challenging for a player who, well, didn't really know what they were doing. I mean, that first room in Halls of Reflection, if you remember that back in the day, you know it's pretty easy to wipe there. Wrath of the Lich King quite possibly had WoW's largest player sub count ever too, so the scope of the ability of the players who are being sent into the LFD was super wide, and this could often lead to toxic situations. The LFD also changed the game in that it grouped you with people cross-server and teleported you straight to the dungeon entrance, eliminating the need for you to travel in the world, and people also argued it diminished the sense of having a server community as well. By today's standards, the vast majority of LFD groups are just silent journeys through 5-player content, and most people accept it as a very useful feature. I think, and this is especially true with retail, the vast majority of people are just quiet players who are pretty casual and benefit massively from this system existing. But for Classic, this is an area which is always an ongoing discussion. As far as I'm concerned, you can auto-group me with whoever from the same realm. I don't care if you put me with the Boomkin and someone who will roll on the same loot as me. I just want to do the dungeon and play the game. If I cared enough, I'd make my own group. I'm fine with still moving to the dungeon in the open world though, we don't need teleports I don't think. But whatever your opinion of the LFD is, you can't argue it's been a huge game changer for World of Warcraft in so many different ways. Next up is something which will soon be an addition to the game actually, and that is player housing. Since the days of the alpha for World of Warcraft, Blizzard has planned on adding some form of housing into the game, and they're finally getting around to it. And I think when this feature is in the game, it will be a game changer due to the amount of content that it will tie into. Things such as professions, customization, your class's identity or warband, being able to collect various items out in the open world to display in your house, and so on. You know, Blizzard even asked in one of those surveys whether Classic players would like housing in a future version of Vanilla, aka Classic Plus. I don't think it's too likely to happen, but I reckon a lot of people will be off-put because of how things went with garrisons, and they imagine it will be the same thing. I think housing could work with a focus on storage and personal achievement display, as long as you could ensure the player would still have many reasons to leave their house for professions, the auction house, mailbox, trading, enchants, world buffs, and so on. And I'm not even a huge housing fan either in MMOs. The best housing I've played was in WildStar, and there for me housing was something where I went to get an XP buff on ults, and I had some farm patches where I was growing stuff, and that was about it. Overall though, once housing is in the game, it'll be hard to imagine World of Warcraft without it. At number 5, we have a feature that was introduced in Cataclysm during its final patch, the ever controversial Looking for Raid. Looking for Raid was a new system that allowed players to queue for raids remotely and cross-server. It will provide a much easier raiding experience, albeit with loot at a lower item level. The goal of it was to get more people into raiding, since Blizzard were making all this awesome endgame content that, proportionally, not a ton of the players were seeing in relation to the total size of the player base. Do you remember that memorial in the center of Dalaran where you could see the Lich King cinematic at the end of Wrath of the Lich King? Yeah, that was put there because story-wise, most players were never ever going to see that fight themselves, let alone beat it. So along came the story mode for World of Warcraft, or LFR I suppose, which now allows everyone to see the content. I mean, LFR was and always has been a messy experience, but it has its upsides because you do get to experience a form of group content, you get to see the bosses, you get to practice your class, and you get to see the cinematics in-game, rather than just waiting for Wowhead to post them. LFR has always been a divisive addition though. In fact, Ghostcrawler had some words to say on his most problematic content during his time at Blizzard. This was during a Q&A during his time at Riot some years ago, by the way. He said, "I have a lot of regrets about Raid Finder in World of Warcraft. I'm sure I worked on features that were much worse, but that's the one that came to mind. To be clear, the goal of getting more players into raiding is a good one, but the way Raid Finder turned out removed, in my opinion anyway, a lot of the epicness of what made raiding. And now in Mr. Pandaria Classic, Blizzard have fully done away with LFR as a system in our Classic timeline. Instead, there are now Celestial Dungeons, which drop LFR equivalent gear, and these will stay updated and relevant as the expansion progresses. These are basically just the dungeons which already exist in the expansion, bumped up a bit in difficulty, with some new mechanics to fit the current raid tier. One of Blizzard's key reasonings for doing this is that nowadays in Classic, a way higher proportion of the player base is actively raiding and seeing the content the game has to offer compared to back in the day. Whether or not this is a better system though, well, of course, people are still split on that. At number 4, I have something which is several updates to the game really, and those are the moments when a new class is added. So we're talking Death Knight in Wrath of the Lich King, Monk in Mists of Pandaria, Demon Hunter in Legion, and Evoker in Dragonflight. A new class is perhaps the single most hype moment for World of Warcraft, and whatever type of player you are, it's always interesting to see how the brand new thing plays. Blizzard have absolutely toned down new class releases over time though. Infamously in Wrath of the Lich King, Death Knights were released as the first hero class, and were just hilariously overpowered to the point where they could tank or DPS as any spec, hit high arena ratings with blue gear, and top damage meters doing just about anything. But a new class totally changes the landscape of the game. It's something to learn and understand for all areas of PvP and PvE. You need to know what kind of roles they do, what are their cooldowns, where do they excel, and so on. And Blizzard have also more recently started to add new specs into the game too, since Demon Hunter and Evoker only released with 2 specializations. Evoker received World of Warcraft's first ever pure support spec in augmentation during Dragonflight, and in Midnight, Demon Hunter will get their 3rd spec, Devourer, which is a void-themed mid-range DPS. A new class is always just so hype, and it's good to see that Blizzard expand on the roster that this game has, as well as adding in the new specs too. Of course, balancing is always an ongoing effort, and things will only get more complicated as they make additions, but when a new class is added, it's always a very big deal. Which means we're on to the top 3 most game-changing updates World of Warcraft has ever seen. 3 things left which I think have made a huge and permanent mark on the game. At 3, I have a brand new endgame edition made in Legion, and that is Mythic Plus. So in earlier WoW expansions, Blizzard had problems keeping their 5-player content relevant, because they would invest so much time into creating them, and then people would blast through them and be done with them in a few weeks in terms of them being endgame content. So in Mists of Pandaria, they introduced challenge modes. These would set your gear to a certain item level, and you would have to complete dungeons as fast as possible to aim for a top spot on your realm's leaderboard. In Warlords of Draenor, they added Mythic Dungeon difficulty too, alongside the new raid difficulty also being upgraded, but this didn't really solve how fast people were done with dungeons at endgame. But in Legion, they tried something completely different, a new difficulty, Mythic Plus. This would take the base Mythic dungeons and add affixes to make them more difficult, from simple health or damage increases on trash or bosses from the likes of Fortified or Tyrannical, to affixes that modified how you had to play the dungeon, such as Explosive, Bolstering, or Sanguine. This system would also infinitely scale and offer gear and currency rewards up to a certain cap. Over time, Mythic Plus has changed significantly, with total affix overhauls, modifications to the base difficulty, reward threshold changes, and tons more. Blizzard have even started to incorporate old Mythic Plus dungeons, or dungeons which never had a Mythic Plus to begin with, into seasonal rotations. And Mythic Plus nowadays, as far as I know, is more popular than raiding as an endgame activity, which isn't honestly surprising given the fewer number of players it requires, good rewards, and pug accessibility. Since Mythic Plus was introduced, it's been a massive hit for World of Warcraft, and has completely changed both how the dungeons are designed within the game and how the endgame is approached as a whole, so it absolutely is one of the biggest additions ever made to the game. At the number 2 spot is the earliest gameplay addition made on this list, which may give you some idea what it will be. This update was first introduced at the start of the Burning Crusade, and I am of course talking about flying. I mean, dragon riding is one thing, but being able to fly at all is entirely another. In TBC, for the first time ever, our characters could take to the skies, albeit the non-epic mounts only flew at 60% speed back then. This was upgraded to 150% in Wrath of the Lich King, and let me tell you, you didn't want to fly if you had to go at 60% speed. But this this new aerial appreciation of the world totally changed just about everything in the open world forever. Suddenly, traversing the world became easy, you could fly away from PvP encounters you didn't want, and it was just a new experience now. Blizzard made content with flying in mind too, such as the dungeons and raids in Netherstorm, and even made sure you had to buy flying by making summoning to those zones impossible until right towards the end of TBC. Flying has been tied to so many cool mounts entering the game, and has been part of big achievement rewards, be that for PvP or PvE. In Cataclysm and beyond, Blizzard reworked the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor to be flying friendly as well. And did you know Blizzard originally made Warlords of Draenor with no plans for flying, but players have become so attached to this feature that they asked for it back non-stop until Blizzard finally said, okay, you can have it back, but you have to do this Pathfinder achievement first to show us that you've explored the world, and then you've earned it. And you still have to do Pathfinder for basic flying in the War Within, even though you can dragon ride instantly, which doesn't really make a ton of sense, but okay. Flying for me though has to be up there as one of the most impactful World of Warcraft updates ever, which leaves me with one choice left, what I think is the most impactful World of Warcraft update of all time, and this gameplay update was made on the same patch that LFR was introduced during Cataclysm, which will give it away for some of you, but I'm talking about transmogrification. Now honestly, it's pretty close between the top three here of Mythic Plus, flying and transmog for me. Where transmog has the edge is that basically everyone uses this system all of the time, from level cap characters all the way to new ones. Everyone has their favourite sets or go-to transmog that they use, whether you're some edgy looking knight or you've got a meme set on your Pandaren or anything in between. It's a way for you to make something which you enjoy. Transmog has also made old content stay relevant for just about as long as it's existed. I mean, older content still has mounts and pets too, to be fair, but people always want to go back to farm sets or for completionism's sake. There have also been events introduced such as the Trial of Style in recent expansions as well to complement this system. Transmog changes how everyone looks all of the time, and it's been criticised for this too, where people say it takes away from designers' work or allows people to wear absolute clown suits in Raid, which really don't fit in. And to be honest, it's not a system I'd ever expect to see in more classic versions of the game because of this, but in retail it's hard to deny to what extent the ability to choose your character's appearance has changed the game. But those are my 10 most gameplay changing updates of all time in World of Warcraft. Let me know what you think. Would have you included anything completely different here? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you once again to boot.dev for supporting the channel. Their courses are free to view, so if you're interested in them, why not check them out via the links down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.